much in the news and getting a lot of attention just this week. Matter of fact, that attention started last Saturday when the iPad was introduced. And the reason why our speaker has gotten so much attention is that Bill Tallent is the architect of the applications that USA Today has on the Android, on the iPhone, and now the iPad. And the reviews on that application, Bill, are extraordinary. If you have not had a chance to see what USA Today, the electronic version, looks like on the iPad, you are in for a real treat. Bill is from right here in Nashville. He's a native Nashvilleian. He did make one huge mistake in his life, and he's had a varied career. He and I had dinner last night, and he's had a fascinating career, but he made one huge mistake in 1988. He actually retired, and he was so bored after 2 years, he said, I've got to go back and go back to work, and he has. And now at age 68, his plan is that he's going to work at least 20 more years. Is that right, Bill? Bill is the chief executive Bill is the chief executive officer of Mercury Intermedia. And Mercury Intermedia specializes in developing native applications for the Apple and Google platforms for large content publishers. He has built apps for several of the nation's leading newspapers, including USA Today, for cable news channels, and for cable entertainment companies. Just this past week, as I say, he's gotten a lot of attention for what he's done on the iPad. Please welcome Bill Tallent.
Jack, thank you very much. You know, when I got ready to, I think they're going to turn the slide projector on for me. When I got ready to leave this morning, my wife said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I've got a speaking engagement this morning at the First Amendment Center." Guess what? I've got to follow John Seigenthaler, which she turned around and dryly said, "If it was me, I'd go back to bed." So maybe I should have taken that advice. But as I was driving in this morning, my God, what a morning. The air's clear. The landscape is painted with tulips reaching for the sky. What a beautiful morning this is. And here we are, gainfully employed in arguably one of the most important industries of our culture, or at least in my case, semi-gainfully employed. And then in the last 7 days, we've been able, from our armchairs, to watch Steve Jobs carpet bomb his competitors and help our industry not once, but 2 times in a 7-day period. So how could it be any better to be in journalism at a time when things are changing the way they are now? I'm going to divide my remarks this morning into 2 sections. I want to talk about the big picture because the smartphone, I'm going to argue, is not really the subject. I'm going to really argue that the subject is 4th generation computers. And then the second half, it's going to be rather random but more practical. We've learned a lot of lessons. We've done a lot of things wrong in the last 2 years, and I want to talk about some of the lessons we've learned in building applications for large journalism enterprises. Sometimes a cartoon says it best. Picture me on the left. I grew up with newspapers, and in the center, picture my kids, none of whom has ever had a daily subscription to a newspaper. And on the right, my grandchildren, who hardly know what a newspaper is, as they text each other constantly. So I want to draw a distinction in terminology between a smartphone and 4th generation computers. A BlackBerry is a smartphone. The iPhone Touch, the Android class computers, and the iPad are 4th generation computers, and they're only the beginning. The primary difference between smartphones and 4th generation computers is the intention of use. With 4th generation computers, computing is the primary intended use. With smartphones like the BlackBerry, it's communications. I've been lucky enough to participate in the first 3 generations of computing, and I had no idea that I would ever live to see the 4th generation. Mainframe computers in the 1960s and 70s were dominant. In the 1980s, the hot thing was mini computers, Digital Equipment Corporation leading the way. And then in the early 80s, IBM announced the personal computer. And for the first time, individuals like us in this room got our hands on a computer and got to experience the power of these devices. And the 4th generation of computers is this class of devices that Apple introduced and that Google has followed up with. When the iPhone was introduced, I admit, I thought it was nothing but a cell phone, and I thought applications were nothing but a way to sell a fancy cell phone. But then they introduced the iTouch, and it didn't have a cell phone. I began to think, wow, what's going on here? When they introduced the iPad, all of a sudden the light went on that this is an entirely new architecture for computing. It's an entirely new ecosystem to support that architecture. That slide and several others you're going to see came from a research analyst at Morgan Stanley that I highly recommend. You can Google Mary Meeker, Morgan Stanley, and get her slide presentations and follow whenever she has something to say, follow her. I recommend her highly. She's done 2 major slide presentations in the last year and a half, and they're really worth your time. She has an outstanding research staff that does basic research. Now, what makes 4th generation computers any different than mainframes, mini computers, and what we've always called PCs? Number 1, they're highly mobile. You've got one in your pocket, I've got one in my pocket. Number 2, they lack a keyboard, mouse, and power cord. Now we've grown up since 1980. Our computers have always had power cords, mice, or mouses, which is it? And keyboards. Thirdly, they're internet connected. Fourthly, and this is really important, they employ profitable application ecosystems that quite often replace websites. Can you imagine? We just got used to websites, and now we've got something that's competing with websites for our attention. Gartner says that by 2015, over half of all computers shipped will have touch screens. Now, what's going to happen from here with 4th generation computers? Well, I've got some suggestions as to what's going to happen. Apple and Android products will consist of a variety of computers. No longer will it be one computer in our life. We'll have a variety of computers, and they'll start with what I call a shirt pocket size screen. And now we have the iPad size screen. There's already news that Apple is developing a smaller iPad screen, but make no mistake about it, where Apple's going is to the living room television. These applications and this ecosystem that Apple has built are designed to be